Greetings. I'm Dave Throgmorton, the director of the Carbon County Higher Education Center. Thanks for joining me. Who are you going to call? Great movie. Strongly recommend that you tune into that movie while you're quarantined. Simpler times, better times. But when you have a spectral ghost of some sort in your attic, who are you going to call? You know, back in the day, we probably called on a cleric if we thought that there was a ghost in the attic. But by the 20th century, we weren't calling on clerics anymore. And besides, they didn't have really cool proton packs and neutrino wands. And the Ghostbusters did have those things. Containment units, they had the whole nine yards. But the question du jour is, who are you going to call? And the cultural artifact in the heart of downtown Rollins that I plan on showing you in just a moment here is all about who you're going to call. Right now, it is the 21st of April, 2020. I am recording this from a bunker in an undisclosed location, as you probably have guessed. Most of us are working from home. Most of us are quarantined. And one of the things that we've discovered is that when you have a pandemic, when you have a virus that is traipsing the entire globe and infecting pretty much everybody and anybody that it comes in contact with, who are you going to call? Well, we ended up calling on an institution that by and large we take for granted and oftentimes we underfund, and that's public health. Public health has the answers to how we are going to resolve this pandemic that's flowing across the world. I think we could probably argue that maybe with the exception of language, public health was the most important human invention. I mean, we usually talk about the wheel as being the most important human invention, but maybe not. We know that the first public sewer systems appeared in Babylon about 4000 BC. That was about the time that all the hunters and gatherers started gathering in one place, and we started developing larger and larger communities. We couldn't just contain the human waste by having it in the street in front of the house. Although we actually did that in Europe up until the 19th century. But so they basically created a public health system so that they could wash the sewage out of the streets every morning, have it flow into one containment unit, a la Ghostbusters, and therefore keep people from being exposed to the kinds of diseases and so forth that they're exposed to when public waste or when waste is around. So public health has become an incredibly important institution for us. It's one that we don't think about a lot. It's one that we don't champion. And obviously, public health has come a long way since we were just kind of washing human waste down the streets. Here in the United States, we have the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. We have the National Institutes of Health. And then we also have our own local public health system. The public health community here in Carbon County is amazing. Everybody should be very grateful that they're on the job and that they are part of our response to this particular virus that is going through. And so when we ask the question, who are you going to call? Well, public health is an institution that we are calling right now. And by golly, I'm very glad that they're there. The talk for today and the cultural artifact that I plan on showing you is about a cultural institution. Who are you going to call? I'm going to start off with this building that you can see on your screen, or at least I hope you can see it on your screen. You probably recognize this building. This building is the Hugus Ferguson building. It's on the corner of Cedar and 5th Street. It has been a grand old building. This building was one of the anchors of a very vibrant and wonderful downtown commercial district in Rollins for many, many years. Started off, it was a grocery store, it was a clothing store, it has housed a number of other businesses, some larger, some smaller. It hasn't been used in nearly 20 years, since basically a little longer than 20 years. This building is currently owned by the county. The county bought this building so that it could house the new Carbon County Museum. Plans are underfoot to raise money to turn this wonderful facility into the downtown Carbon County Museum, where it will once again assume its natural role as an anchor to a vibrant commercial district in downtown Rollins. I don't know what you can see when you look at this building. One of the things I see is I see that the pigeons on the right are practicing social distancing. The ones in the middle, not so much. But this isn't really what this talk is about. It's not about the Hugus Ferguson building. It's about an appendage to the Hugus Ferguson building. This. What you're looking at here, this is a lamp post that you have probably seen every time you've walked by the building. Probably you've seen it so many times it's invisible. This particularly, it's a pole that is about 15 feet tall. There's a perpendicular pole to it, and hanging off of that perpendicular pole is a single dangling bulb. Back in the day, and people that I have spoken with who grew up in Rollins and were born in the immediate post-World War II era say they remember this thing operating. So I think back in the day means this particular device was used from the 1920s into the 1950s. This was Rollins' version of 911. The local cop on the beat downtown checking doors to make sure the merchants had locked them up properly when they left for the day, making sure that the patrons of the bars and brothels didn't get out of hand, taking the occasional person who'd had too much fun and making sure that they either got home safely or directed home safely. As they're making their rounds, they would look up periodically into the night sky, and if this light bulb was switched on, they would run down to the dispatch office, find out where help was needed, and off they would go. Who are you going to call? Rollins' version of 911. Here's a picture of it on top of the building, which gives you a little bit of context. And I'm sure now that you can see it as it is, you recognize it and you've seen it every single day. This single bulb kind of reminds me of the way institutions grow and the way institutions expand or sometimes shrink. The institution of law enforcement has grown considerably over the years. Our lives have become more complicated. Perhaps we've become more fearful. Some of the issues that we have dealt with, for whatever reason, we don't trust our other institutions to deal with those issues. And so we have essentially imbued law enforcement with much more trust, and therefore we have imbued law enforcement with a lot more power and authority. And the result is these simpler times with a single dangling bulb are gone forever. At the time that this bulb was in operation, it would have been unthinkable to have law enforcement expand to the point that we had officers patrolling hallways in high schools. In 2020, it's practically unthinkable to think that they're not patrolling the hallways in high schools. Many of our social problems, many of the issues that have arisen between us as people and between us and our communities have become the kinds of issues where when we ask the question, who are you going to call? Law enforcement becomes the very first agency that we think we're going to call. And I think perhaps sometimes it would be worthwhile to think that, or to consider that maybe there's some other institutions that could pick up some of the slack somewhere along the line. Perhaps it's not fair to law enforcement to have them as the first line responders every time you ask the question, who are you going to call? So as a sociologist, looking at this wonderful cultural artifact on top of the building, those are the kinds of things I think about. Appreciate you joining today. I think we'll get out of here with another small clip. See you next time.